so many of you here, so many familiar faces, although we feel awful far away from you. But we'll get started. So you all know Kamil, our Regional Vice President for Africa and the Middle East. The format of this session is going to be a quick overview of Africa, the Middle East, some of the challenges or opportunities that they both face together, and then as well as a split between both regions. So we'll get started, and then there'll be time for questions at the end. Thanks.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being patient with us. So let's start off. If you look on the chart right behind me, you'll see that for Africa, we did a comparison a little different than the presentations that we had earlier. So we're looking at performance from January to April this year in comparison to last year. And if you look for Africa, you'll see that the RPKs are actually decent at 9.1%. ASKs are 7.3, i.e. comparing to global passenger demand, you'll see that the African passenger demand is actually higher by 9% than it was last year. And you'll see that the global cargo demand is at about 3.4% of what it was last year. That's the global cargo, whereas the African cargo demand is about 5.5 down than it was last year. And you'll see that's a common trend between Africa and MENA. Both regions have cargo reducing. When you look at the Middle East, the global average, RPK is at 6%, the Middle East is absolutely on par with that. The ASK is a little lower at 4.1 compared to 5.4, 5.4. So the Middle East, in general, the demand is up for passengers. Global cargoes at 3.4, and again, the Middle East demand for cargo has gone down by 5.3%. If you look at the growth for both Africa and the Middle East, starting off with the Middle East here, you'll see that it'll double to about 530 million by the year 2043. And if you look at Africa, you'll see the same. It'll go up by double in 2043, hitting 345 million. The two priorities. So the way IATA functions, it has global priorities, and then it has regional priorities. So the global priorities apply to all the regions, and then the regional priorities obviously are focused for the regions and the needs for the aviation industry. For AMI, the two priorities obviously is blocked funds and safety, and we'll go into that in a bit more detail now. So blocked funds, internationally, total blocked funds is about 1.something billion dollars, $1.28 billion. As of April, that's as of April this year. 1.1 billion of that actually belongs to AMI, Africa and the Middle East. And from the 1.1 billion, 919 million is actually Africa. So you can see the bulk, the 85% roughly, of the blocked funds globally is actually in Africa. If you compare where we are this year to last year, and remember, blocked funds change month over month. Last year we worked, extensively. We very much focused on Nigeria's blocked fund, which hit about $850-something million, and that's completely gone now. We worked with Ethiopia, and that's dropped significantly. And we worked with Egypt, again, dropped significantly from 3 digits down to the lower part of the 2 digits. And this is what we generally do, but it takes a lot of time. Moving to safety, you'll see that sorry, but I'm getting old, so I have to write these numbers down. Yep, so safety. The average safety is a global safety standard level right now is at 1.13 accidents per million flight, and that's globally. if you look at the two regions, we split them specifically for safety. So if you look at the MENA region compared to the AFI region, there's a significant difference. The MENA being at 1.08, so it's still going down year over year, whereas the African part is at 10.59. Collectively, we're still better than the 5-year average, but that doesn't mean that we stop working. So the most active part of the AMI region is always focused on enhancing safety in both regions. And so we always have heavy engagements, in particular in Africa, to promote safety and let's say, try to continue to push the safety levels up and the accidents down. So the risk per operator, it's pretty flat in both areas. We're relatively fine in both MENA and Africa and MENA. So let's go on. Yep. So they're both at 0. Making aviation more affordable. Okay, so this is the parts that has been sort of unique for Africa. When you look at, and again, we're splitting the region into MENA and AFI. If you look at Africa, and if somebody asked me, and I've been saying this for the last 4 years, if I wanted to open an airline, it would not be in Africa. It's extremely challenging due to the costs and the way no matter which part of the aviation industry you want to start up in Africa, it's very expensive. But in particular for airlines, if you look at the cost of fuel, it's between 17 and, depending on which country, up to 25% more expensive in Africa. If you look at insurance, if you look at charges, parking fees, flyovers, one of the most expensive airports in the world is in Africa, which is Lagos in Nigeria. Air navigation charges are 10% higher. Maintenance, I have it at 6 to 10%, but I know it depends actually where you're in Africa. So the average is from 6 to 10% for maintenance, but it's actually can hit up to 30% more expensive. Just taking loans from banks for airlines can reach 30% more expensive. Operating in Africa is complicated just because of the costs. But there's other reasons why it is, the aviation industry is not thriving in Africa. And the first one, and it stands out quite clearly, is this protectionism that is applied by state to the state. When you have 2 or 3 African states sitting together, they're all gung-ho and they all agree on opening the skies and collaborating with each other. But once you have them on their own, they go into their shells and want to protect their local airlines. And that means that even though they have bilateral agreements that are quite free and allow them to operate almost comfortably, they actually usually veer off from allowing all the conditions of the bilateral agreements between the countries to be fully utilized. Limited capacity, so if you look at the airlines, this is in general, we know the big ones. So in general, the airlines are small size, okay, so the capacity is usually limited, making travel even more complicated, because if you have a small airline with a small number of aircraft, then the destinations are quite limited because they select the destinations that probably provide the highest yield. Connectivity is the other issue. Also, again, due to the first two, so it's a bilateral agreements that limited the connectivity, and the other one's the number of equipment and of course the price to operate there. So if you have an expensive airport and it costs you an arm and a leg to lease an aircraft, and the fuel is expensive and the MR is expensive, the connectivity obviously then becomes limited because you can't operate to all these destinations. There's a slow implementation of Saturn, and I say slow, so I would say almost a snail speed. There's been very little development, at least in the 4 years that I've been involved with Saturn, and it's complicated, and that's a whole different story. I could spend 3 hours discussing it. But these are some of the reasons that's also hampering the growth of the aviation industry. Some other reasons. Visas, for example, 4 countries, Benin, the Gambia, Rwanda, and Seychelles just opened it up for Africa. They said, any African doesn't need a visa to go into, for example, Rwanda. And there's a positive impact immediately, but that's actually not applicable at all. And in fact, I was with one of my guys in one African country, and I was able to travel to the second African country far easier than he could because he was African, which makes no sense to me. Okay, and that's a fact. So having moving from the traditional restricted security type visas to opening up for the African states for each other, at least in the start, would make would start contributing to the aviation growth, but also things like e-visas and recognizing currencies and so on and so forth, sharing the information between countries, security information between countries will also facilitate all this. Government supports. So in Africa there are different countries that have different ways of supporting the airlines, and so if I name one bunch, if I say let's look at Egypt, let's look at, for example, Morocco, and let's look at Ethiopia, and look at the aviation industry thrive there. You can see the contribution the aviation does to the GDP right away. You don't even have to think about it. Look at Kenya Airways and so on. And then you have other countries that are not supporting the airline, and so let's jump straight into Nigeria. Okay, so there are 6 airlines there, all struggling, most expensive airport, the highest charges, highest fuel, even though it's number 10 in the world in exporting fuel. Everything works against the aviation industry. Look at how the aviation industry is suffering in Nigeria, and what does it contribute to the GDP? All right, so the message can't be any louder than that, right? So moving over to the Middle East priorities, different ballgame completely. There are 2 priorities. The first one is actually trying to unify the regulations. I've had several back-to-back meetings with the GCC operators on unifying the regulations. Not as straightforward as it sounds. It took the EU years to get to that level, but at least we're moving forwards on this, which is a great thing. The second priority for the Middle East, obviously, is no states left behind. And so I'm already on a number of projects which I can't mention here, but this is where you will see 4 or 5 countries getting together to assist a 5th country or a 6th country to develop it. And this is quite prominent in the GCC. Recently, in the last couple of months, you've seen this change in Syria, and that's a case by itself. But the number of airlines, civil aviations, and entities within the GCC countries asking IATA and ICAO and others to play a pivotal role in developing the aviation industry in Syria is something that demonstrates how important it is to the MENA region, at least, that they implement the no state left behind sort of philosophy. Now moving to one of the last subjects is the aviation in the Middle East is not developing evenly. Again, and I questioned whether we should brief this because it's a whole subject on its own. But geopolitical instability, I think everybody's aware of, and you can see the sudden impact in the crisis mode that pretty much the aviation industry itself in general and the AMI region in particular then has to go into that crisis mode and a change of operation plan and aircrafts being stuck at different locations and so on and so forth. the obvious other one, and this is one that came up this morning in an earlier brief, you know, the airspace closure between, for example, India and Pakistan. Okay, so I was actually a CEO when that first happened, and it does change your schedule, and does any airspace closure changes your schedule. Sometimes you don't have the equipment anymore because the flight time takes longer and so on. So this is quite common in the AMI region. It happens a lot, and airlines and civil aviation, the government have to adapt really quickly to get back onto schedule, and obviously it adds a lot of cost to the operations. So these restrictions have been quite common in the last 3 or 4 years, and it's an issue that's hampering the AMI region in particular. Sanctions is the other one, and without going into details, but I mean, if you look at, so there are exactly 67 countries in the AMI region. Out of those 67 countries, 21 are sanctioned, okay? And out of the 67 countries, there are about 12 conflicts going on. So this is the AMI region, okay? So it's complicated to operate in. And of course, it has a negative impact on the industry itself, and definitely on the airlines. There are other things that are not particularly unique, but very rampant in the region, which is the GNSS, whether it's spoofing or complete jamming, and that's the satellite navigation systems. And I've actually suffered it myself. So you can open your phone and find that you're actually in the middle of the runway in Beirut, and you're actually in a different country. Or in my case, I ended up being in the airport in Cairo while I was in Jordan. And that's GNS spoofing, you know, at its best. So economic disparity, there are different, you know, the 67 countries all have different GDPs. They all have different levels of let's say, wealth, okay? And of course that then makes it, you know, a little bit more complicated to operate in, okay? So GCC, for example, UAE, Qatar, Saudi, Kuwait, and Bahrain have built, you know, amazing airports and hubs and support the aviation industry with like 20 years planning ahead, right? And you can do this because you do have that cash behind it to support that. But that's actually not applicable to most of the other other countries, and that slows down a little bit the aviation industry, where, you know, they struggle to support the infrastructure and grow the aviation industry. The next one, which is the regulatory harmonization opportunities. I've worked in the past between countries to try to unify regulations, and the benefits are a mile long. And of course, these benefits will help literally all parts of the industry. And I think if you go back to 1944 in December, ICAO was first invented or created. It was actually created for that, but it never got around to it. And the only entity that's managed to do it is the EU under the IATA regulations, which facilitate the ease for airlines, MROs, airports, and so on to operate. This doesn't exist anywhere else outside Europe. We have a couple of projects, one in the GCC to do that, and the other one is under the Focus Africa initiative to start off with 16 countries in the SADC states, in the southern part of Africa, with that intent. Obviously, it will take a lot of work and the collaboration of all those states to achieve that. But I mean, it's very rewarding for the industry. Of course, it's the same it should apply for the rest of the aviation industry, whether it's passenger rights, you know, charges and so on. So it's fair for the operators, or else it becomes very unfair to operate into one state. And I think the South African media here understand that when we look at the triple E, double B issue that is currently in South Africa, and the harm that it may have on the aviation industry. Maintenance and safety oversight, that's also, let's move on. All right, what's next? Priorities, yes. The 5 priority areas, yeah. Okay. So, particularly for Africa, need to move towards a more integrated air travel market. Okay, and that is so the MENA region is moving towards that, or have achieved actually significant progress in that. Whereas I think looking at SATAM and where we've achieved and having this integrated air transport market is far from it in Africa. Fair and proportionate consumer protection regulations. Pretty much 24, and this year we've seen a number of countries bounce into consumer regulations. So Saudi kicked theirs out last year, and we were quite involved in the start. We were currently involved in the revision period. Oman did the same thing. We were involved directly with them. And currently the UAE is going through it, and we're involved with them. It's vital that the industry is involved when these regulations come out, and we try to avoid a repeat of EU 261. And in fact, it seems to be that states use 261 as their reference, and so they start off with 261, and you end up sort of struggling to push them away from all the elements of 261, highlighting all the reasons why they shouldn't be doing 261. But so far we've been quite successful in managing some of the states that are currently working or have recently produced some new consumer protection regulations. Investments. So you can see this. If you look at the investments that most of the states put, or at least the 67 states that I'm taking care of, put into infrastructure, there are common things that you notice. So the countries are leading in the aviation industry, plan 20, 30, or 40 years ahead, and the ones that are struggling or not leading in the aviation industry plan ad hoc. Okay, so you'll see, forever I'm arguing charges because a country would say, I need a new radar system, and it's 50 years old. And when you look at the charges that are currently paid by the airlines, they're already paying for this 50-year-old radar, and now there's a new radar coming in. They expect to increase the charges to buy these new radars. And this applies to airports, expansion of airports and runways and so on and so forth, which is quite surprising. And this is something that I don't think governments actually know very well, but it does hamper the growth of the aviation industry. It seems like you can see there's always a catch-up when it comes to infrastructure in the aviation industry in the AME region. Enhancing maintenance and safety oversight, and so again, there is a point where there won't be enough maintenance organizations or maintenance repair stations to handle the growth that's happening right now. And you'll see that the bigger airlines have to rely on their own to do this, and you can see some of the big ones in the GCC, Saudi, Qatar, and in fact, if you look at the new MRO in Saudi, it's huge, with the intent to support growth for the next 30 years. And this is important. Whereas if you move into Africa, you'll see it's either dormant or shrinking, in fact, not taking into account the level of growth that we expect in the next 20 years, and the demand for maintenance facilities to maintain these aircraft either airworthy or safe. So the last one here, which is the one that we may be involved in heavily very soon, which is the support for states that are just coming out of sanctions, and so I'm engaged with one state right now who's come out of some sort of sanction, and it's actually hard work because you have to bring up this state and all of it, whether it's airport, ANSP, fuelers, ground handlers, airlines, regulators, from 20 years to current in a year, basically. They are locked out for 20 years or 30 years, and you have to and then they realize that they need help, so they even fall behind after that. At least in the AMI region, we're very engaged with that. So we reach out to these states to offer that sort of support, whether it's airports, regulators, ANSPs, airlines, and so on. That's it. We're open for questions.
Would Karen at the back?
So yes, it's Karen Smith representing Business Day from South Africa. Two things. Do you think open skies in Africa is just really, should one just admit it's a pipe dream? And secondly, could you say more about the BEE, the impact, the negative impact, please? Just passing it to my colleague next to me.
Yeah.
Lady Brent from News 24 Business. It's kind of similar to Karen's thing. Also an explanation on the triple BEE. And does this relate to foreign shareholding in local airlines? We know that domestic airlines in South Africa have come under fire for having international partners which have more than the 25% requirement of their ownership. Is that what you're referring to, or is it something else?
All right, so let me tackle the first one. The open skies, I don't see why not. I think it's an educational issue, and I don't think it was tackled correctly by the people who are handling it right now. Okay, so I mean, if you look at the bilaterals, and we did a full study, you'll see that you know, the bilaterals are not bad at all. It's getting the civil aviation to not protect its own airline, and that is actually the biggest issue I noticed. Okay, I don't think the open skies is an issue at all. Whether I mean, exactly like the bilaterals. Bilaterals are there and they're not bad. It's getting the states to implement it. I don't think it's a dream. I just think there needs to be more awareness and a bit of stability. So Africa is 54 states, and the post holders that make these decisions generally rotate. If they were long enough, if the 54 were in a room long enough to get through this, I think it'll be something that can be achieved. For South Africa's triple B, the issue is more complicated, and right now, the details, although it's being handled by my AF's office in Joburg, okay, the actual details not with me. So I actually can't answer that question. Yeah, I'll get back to you once I have them.
We'll go to
Good afternoon, Kamil from News Aero. I have two questions. The first one is about accident report delay. I remember during the last meeting, IATA was charging government on that issue. Would like to know whether there are some improvement within African states. The second question is related to the IATA safety leadership chapter. During the last report, it was mentioning that 14 African airlines have joined the initiative. I would like to know whether there are some additional one and how this leadership charter is actually going.
All right, so for the first one. So I started teaching accident investigation safety management in 99, 2000, right? Okay. And the first thing I would say, I used to start off saying is you know, to have an accident is very unfortunate, but not to learn from it is unforgivable. Yeah. All right. So with Africa, there has been no improvement in the reporting lines of investigation. There are tons of open investigations remain open. Okay, and the reporting is very bad. And this goes up to the ICAO level. Okay, so civil aviations tend not to report to the ICAO level, and ICAO has actually officially complained a number of times in their events to the civil aviations about this reporting. As for the leadership charter, I'll leave it with you, Catherine.
So there have been more airlines signed the Safety Leadership Charter. I'll need to double check if there are more African ones, but I'm pretty sure that there were. And in terms of accident reporting, we have seen a marginal improvement. And for more information on both of those topics, actually, they'll be covered in the Safety and Operations briefing with Nick Careen on Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock. So, but I'll get back to you with details. Dina, we'll go to Dina.
So, Dina Kamil from the National. You mentioned a couple of points on Syria and your work with states that are coming out of sanctions. So I was just wondering, looking forward with Syria now having the US and the EU have lifted sanctions off of Syria, and I was just wondering how big do you anticipate eventually the Syrian aviation market to be? What is the potential for the growth there down the line in the medium to long term? And secondly, you mentioned helping IATA, helping some states that are coming out of sanctions. What kind of work do you anticipate doing in Syria, especially with, as you mentioned, lobbying by Gulf states to do so? If you can expand a little bit on those points.
Yeah, what I anticipate, so let me get to the first one, right? So your first part of the question is, yes, now that the sanctions are removed, what do you think the aviation industry would be in Syria, right? So if everything went well, it'll boom, okay, but I mean, the Syrians need to go somewhere, right? So if they're restricted to visa requirements, which they are currently, then, the growth won't be as much as everybody expects, right? So for Syria, there are a number of issues. One is the number of the amount of money basically they have to invest into their aviation industry, whether it's the upgrade of the ANSPs or the airports or the ground handling of the fuelers, the regulatory requirements, and the airlines, whether it's local airlines or external airlines. So this depends on a far bigger plan than just a simple answer that IATA can step in and help and everything's going to be hunky-dory. It doesn't work like that, right? On the other part, it depends on, so what can IATA do? It actually, there's very little IATA can't do, okay? There are areas that IATA does not go into, but it can, but it depends on the engagement and the parties that want us to be involved and at what level. So this conversation hasn't started yet. So when it starts, then you and I can have that conversation afterwards. But at this particular moment, we have to actually have that conversation to say, okay, each country operates differently, each country is asked IATA to help differently, and so on and so forth.
I've got time for one last question, Mark at the front, and then we can take questions out.
Thank you. Kamil, Mark Payne, Aviation Week, Arabian Aerospace. There's been quite a lot of talk about the bilaterals on Africa, but what about Middle East to other places? And I'm specifically thinking about Middle East to India. What's your view on that situation? Should there be more liberalisation of that situation, please?
So it is, and it's called bilateral, right? It has to be from both ends, right? And I know there's almost like a 5-year cycle when it comes to the GCC in India. I don't know why. If you look at it, you'll see it's a 5-year cycle where there's a bit of dust storm and then things settle. But we have to remember, we're talking about 6 or 7 countries in the GCC with a country. Okay, it's I know we label GCC as almost like a country, but I mean how for example the UAE wants to handle its bilaterals with India is far different than how Bahrain wants to handle it, okay, or Saudi wants to handle it. And I think if you look, I think they've had over the last at least 30 years that I've been involved a decent relationship both ends, okay, and I can't see that messing up in any which way. And I think that if you look, the GCC carriers have been, they've not all approached it in the same sort of manner, but have been quite successful with India and vice versa. And I don't see anything, sort of a disruption coming down in the near future. I think both parties, both ends know exactly what needs to be done, and generally spend some decent time together to get it done.
Thank you. We'll take any other questions outside because there's another briefing now.
Just one related question to this. How important is India in terms of traffic for GCC market?
Just look at the population and the answer's there, right? It's a little bit bigger than 1/8 of the world. So, for the GCC, India is a very important market.
Any figure that you have?
We don't
No, I
have
don't
now.
have
We don't have now, but I can find out from you. For you.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Oh, thank you.